Calls are growing for a ceasefire across the Israel-Lebanon border to halt the missile attacks that have claimed more than 600 lives in 3 days. The proposal was put forward by the United States and France and has been endorsed by countries including Germany. But Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has yet to respond, instead ordering the army to continue fighting with full force.
Southern Lebanon awakes to the sound of explosions as the cross-border conflict with Israel rages on. Tens of thousands of people have already fled the region after Israel issued them a deadline to evacuate. Many are heading for the relative safety of neighbouring Syria.
We came here because we were given a deadline. They warned us to evacuate the area, so we came. We've been here on the Syrian-Lebanese border for 4 hours.
For some, it's a homecoming mixed with an uncomfortable feeling of déjà vu.
We left Syria in 2014 because of the war. So we went to South Lebanon and lived and worked there. Then this latest war in the south started. There were too many strikes and a lot of destruction. So we left again.
Far away from the front lines, France called an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council in New York. Secretary-General Antonio Guterres summed up the fears harboured by many.
Hell is breaking loose in Lebanon.
He urged for restraint on all sides.
Stop the killing and destruction, turn down the rhetoric and threats, step back from the brink. An all-out war must be avoided at all costs. It would surely be an all-out catastrophe.
Israel's envoy said that his country wanted peace while doubling down on their reasons for the conflict.
Never again will the Jewish people hide from the monsters whose purpose in life is to murder Jews. Never again will we provide the benefit of the doubt to those who declare their intention to murder Jews. When they tell us and show us who they are, we will believe them.
As the diplomats in New York keep pushing for a ceasefire, those on the ground in Israel, Lebanon, and the Palestinian territories remain in the line of fire.
Let's speak now to Mirav Sunshine, who is a senior analyst at the International Crisis Group, an independent organisation working to prevent wars. She joins us from Tel Aviv. It's great to have you on DW News. So, international leaders are pressing hard for an immediate ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah. Netanyahu has told soldiers to keep fighting. Is the current ceasefire proposal essentially dead in the water?
It certainly seems that way. We've been at this war for 11 months now. We're almost at a year. And it's very, very important that there be pressure for a ceasefire, both in Gaza and in Lebanon. So I'm happy to see that leaders are working hard and trying, but there has to be more done. And right now, it seems like what's happening is they're putting it out there, the American and the French, and they're seeing what Israel and Lebanon, or Hezbollah more correctly, are doing in response. And right now, both, or at least the Israeli side has outright rejected it. And there's political consensus across Israel that there can't be a ceasefire right now. So it does seem dead even before it has had a chance to gain any traction.
Is Israel not listening to its biggest ally, the United States, anymore?
In some ways, Israel hasn't been listening to the U.S., not just its ally, but its funder and provider of military weapons and diplomatic cover. But I think the more important thing to think about here is that the U.S. has not used its leverage. It hasn't used its power. The Biden administration has clearly made a decision not to use his power to not supply Israel with certain weapons with which it is prosecuting wars in both Gaza and Lebanon. And without pushing Netanyahu in that way, we'll never know if that leverage could actually work to de-escalate or to reach actual ceasefire. So I would say it's less about Israel listening and more about the U.S. not pushing.
Right. Now, Israeli soldiers have also been told to prepare for a possible ground offensive in Lebanon. Could a ground offensive achieve Israel's stated goal of improving security for Israelis?
Based on our experience in 2006 and what's known as the Second Lebanon War, absolutely not. That war was one of the first wars where Israel clearly did not win, and it had a ground invasion. It lasted, I think, 30-some days. There is the constant threat of a ground invasion in some circles in Israel on the far right. It's a fait accompli. The displaced residents have been calling for it. Their fears are very, very real. They don't want anybody that they can see from their houses, any Radwan forces, any Hezbollah weapons there. But a ground invasion will be a net loss for Israel. It's something that I don't think will achieve even basic security for the north, not to mention the entire country being under rocket fire, something that a ground invasion cannot do. And very similar to the goals that we've seen in Gaza. You know, if Israel has not been able to remove the threat of Hamas, or at least detach Hamas from its stronghold in Gaza, then I don't see how it can do it with Hezbollah, which is much, much stronger, has a huge backing in Iran as its patron. I just don't see it happening.
You've mentioned Gaza there. Of course, this whole situation that we're talking about is going on as the war in Gaza continues. Do you see an end to the situation there?
Unfortunately, I don't. We're a year in and there's no end in sight. There's no exit strategy. There's no day after plan. And I think Israel's trying now to decouple the fronts. It's trying to get Hezbollah to back down from its commitment to keep firing unless there's a ceasefire in Gaza. And Netanyahu has made clear that he's not interested in a ceasefire. And Israel's own defense officials have gotten behind the hostage deal and ceasefire that Netanyahu continues to reject. So unfortunately, I see right now indefinite IDF presence in Gaza, and as well as a continuation of the escalation we're seeing in Lebanon, really with no exit strategy or off-ramp.
Now, militants in neighbouring countries have reportedly started to attack Israel too. There were reports that the southern city of Eilat was supposedly hit by drones from the Iraqi Islamic resistance. How do you interpret all of this?
Well, there's been, proxies from Iraq, from Syria, and other places, Yemen, the Houthis, of course. They've been firing at Israel since the October 7th Hamas attack. So that's been part of the reality here. Yemen and Iraq are obviously much farther away from Israel, so it's a different kind of animal than Hezbollah. But if what we can understand from this is that if this continues and if Israel ups the escalation ladder, that they will also probably up the escalation on their side and try to fire more and more at Israel and maybe also at American targets. And what we face for, again, the last 11 months, but even more so now, is the threat of all-out regional war that would pull in Iran, that would pull in the U.S., even though nobody really wants that. In lieu of any kind of diplomacy and in lieu of pressure on Israel, that's where we're headed.
We'll leave it there. Mirav Sunshine from the International Crisis Group in Tel Aviv. Thanks for joining us on DW News today.
Thanks, Pablo.